The house was mine. The boundary was real. I signed the closing papers on a quiet Tuesday morning, not in celebration, not in excitement, in relief. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of every year I had spent bracing myself against people who treated my life like it belonged to them. When the final signature dried, the attorney smiled politely and congratulated me. I nodded, but inside, I wasn't celebrating ownership. I was celebrating escape. By mid-afternoon, I was driving alone toward the coast, the keys resting in the center console like something fragile. The road stretched forward in a clean, uninterrupted line. No passengers, no commentary, no one asking questions or making plans I never agreed to. Just silence. That was the point. The beach house wasn't flashy. It wasn't massive. It wasn't designed to impress anyone scrolling past it on a screen. It was designed to protect me. Palm trees lined the streets as I turned into the neighborhood. Everything looked controlled, intentional. Clean sidewalks, trimmed hedges, quiet homes that minded their own business. The kind of place where boundaries weren't seen as cruelty. They were expected. I pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel. This was mine. No shared ownership. No family claims. No emotional leverage disguised as love. Mine. The ocean breeze carried the faint smell of salt and sunscreen, drifting through the open car window. Somewhere in the distance, waves broke in a steady rhythm, indifferent to everything else. I stepped out and walked to the front door. My front door. When I unlocked it, the sound of the latch releasing echoed in the quiet interior. The living room greeted me with soft sunlight filtering through wide windows. Empty space. Clean walls. No history, no memories, no expectations. Just possibility. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. For the first time in years, my shoulders lowered without me telling them to. I didn't realize how tightly I had been holding myself together until that moment. Then my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Paige. My sister. The name glowed across the display like a warning sign. I let it ring. Not because I was busy, because I wanted to hold on to this piece for a few seconds longer. It stopped, then started again, and again. Persistence had always been her weapon. Eventually, I answered. Hello. Her voice came through immediately, bright and energized. Not warm, not caring, expectant. 2 hours, she said. No greeting, no congratulations, just a timeline. I frowned slightly. 2 hours for what? She laughed, like I had asked something adorable instead of necessary. I'm coming to the beach house, she said. I've got 12 people with me. 12. She said it casually, like she was telling me the weather. They're excited. She continued. None of them have ever stayed somewhere like this before. Somewhere like this? Not your house. Not your property. Somewhere like this. I stayed silent. She didn't notice, or didn't care. You'll need to clean everything, she went on. Fresh sheets, towels, stock the fridge. And obviously I'm taking the master bedroom. Obviously, she paused, waiting, not for permission, for compliance. You can take the couch, she added, like she was offering me something generous. It'll only be for a month. A month. The word landed heavily in my chest. I pictured strangers walking through my kitchen. Sand grinding into the floors. Cameras everywhere. Paige laughing and filming, while I disappeared into the background of my own life. The old version of me would have argued, would have explained, would have begged her to understand. The old version of me believed if I said the right words, she might respect them. But Paige never respected words. She respected leverage. So I gave her neither. Okay, I said simply. She paused. Just for a second, she had expected resistance, conflict, drama. Instead, she got agreement. Her laugh returned, louder now. See, she said. You're finally learning. Then she hung up. I lowered the phone slowly, My heart was beating faster than I wanted it to, but not from fear, from clarity. Because Paige hadn't surprised me. She had confirmed what I already knew. She was coming whether I invited her or not. The difference this time was simple. This time, I was ready. I walked through the house again, but not as a dreamer, as an owner. Every door, every window, every lock, I checked them carefully. Then I opened the welcome folder left on the kitchen counter. Inside were the neighborhood rules, HOA policies, occupancy limits. Most people would have ignored them. I didn't, because rules, unlike emotions, could be enforced. One line stood out immediately. Maximum overnight occupancy 6. Unregistered guests prohibited. Violations subject to removal and penalty. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand. Because I did. Completely. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed for community management. A woman answered. Her voice was calm. Efficient. Professional. Community management. She said. My name is Nora. I replied. I just purchased the property on Pelican Ridge. Congratulations, she said. Thank you, I said. I need to make something clear. I explained briefly, not emotionally, factually. My sister plans to arrive today with a large group. I said. They do not have my permission to enter or stay. She didn't hesitate. If they are not authorized, she said, they will not be permitted access. Simple, clean, enforceable. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened the Smart Lock app and changed every access code, front door, garage, side entry, all of it. Control returned in quiet, deliberate steps. Not through confrontation, through preparation. 2 hours later, I saw the cars. A line of them turning onto my street, SUVs, rental vans, and Paige's white car leading them like a parade. They parked in front of my house. Doors opened. People stepped out, laughing, stretching, filming. They moved like they already owned the place. Paige walked up to the front door confidently, phone already recording. She knocked. Once. Twice. Then tried the handle. Locked. Her smile flickered, confusion replacing certainty. Then, behind her, another vehicle pulled up. Community security. The officer stepped out calmly and approached her. He held a clipboard. Paige turned toward him, still smiling, still filming, still believing this was her story to control. He handed her the notice, and for the first time since she arrived, her smile disappeared. She stared at the paper like it was written in a language she didn't recognize. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny. Because she thought she could still win. But what she didn't realize yet was that she hadn't just brought 12 people to my house. She had brought evidence. And in less than 10 minutes, her cameras would capture something she never planned for. The moment she lost control. Paige didn't read the notice right away. She held it in one hand, her phone still raised in the other, the camera pointed outward like a shield. Her smile stayed in place, but it wasn't natural anymore. It was stretched thin, artificial, performative. She laughed lightly and angled her phone so her audience could see her face. This is ridiculous, she said brightly. We literally just got here. The security officer didn't react to her tone. He didn't react to her camera. He didn't react to her audience. He reacted to the policy. Mom, he said calmly, this property owner has issued a no trespass directive. You and your group are not authorized to enter or remain here. Her smile tightened further. She turned the notice over like, maybe it would say something different on the other side. Behind her, her friends had stopped unloading their bags. Their excitement had stalled, replaced by uncertainty. One of them lowered her suitcase slowly, watching. Paige shook her head and let out another laugh, louder this time. This is my sister's house, she said. Like that alone invalidated everything else. The officer's expression didn't change. And she has stated you do not have permission to enter. Paige's eyes flicked toward the house, toward me. She knew I was inside. She couldn't see me behind the curtain, but she knew. She always knew where I was, emotionally, where I hesitated, where I doubted, where I broke. But today I wasn't breaking. She stepped closer to the door and knocked again, harder. Nora, she called, her voice falsely cheerful. Stop being weird and open the door. Her friends shifted behind her, some still filming, others suddenly uncomfortable. The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't escalate. He simply stood there, steady and immovable. This is your second notice, he said. You need to leave the property. Paige turned back toward him sharply. No, she said, her smile finally dropping. That single word carried the weight of her entire life philosophy. No rules applied to her. No boundaries held her. No consequences stayed permanent. She had always relied on pressure. Pressure had always worked. Until now, she lifted her chin. I have permission, she said firmly. The officer nodded slightly. Do you have written authorization from the homeowner? The question hung in the air. Paige hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. I talked to her, she said quickly. That is not written authorization. Her jaw tightened. Behind her, one of her friends whispered something I couldn't hear. Paige ignored it. Instead, she raised her phone higher. This is harassment, she said loudly, clearly performing now. We came here peacefully. The officer didn't argue. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, he said calmly. I have a group refusing to comply with a no trespass directive, requesting additional support. Paige's eyes widened briefly. Fear flickered there, but she buried it quickly under anger. You're calling the police, she demanded. He met her gaze evenly. Yes. That word landed heavier than anything else, because police meant record, record meant permanence, permanence meant consequences. Behind the curtain, I felt my pulse steady instead of race. This wasn't chaos, this was structure. Paige turned toward the house again. Her voice softened suddenly, manipulation replacing aggression. Nora, she called sweetly. Come on, this is embarrassing. Embarrassing. Not wrong, not unfair. Embarrassing, because embarrassment was the only thing she believed mattered. I stayed still, silent, unreachable. Minutes passed. Her friends began shifting more noticeably now, their confidence draining with each passing second. One of them quietly picked her suitcase back up. Another lowered her phone. This wasn't the glamorous beach arrival they had expected. This was something else entirely. Then Paige reached into her oversized bag. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She held it up triumphantly. I have paperwork, she announced. The officer extended his hand. May I see it? She hesitated, then handed it over. He unfolded it carefully. Read it. Paused. His expression didn't explode into outrage. It sharpened, focus replacing neutrality. Behind him, a second patrol vehicle arrived. 2 more officers stepped out. Paige watched their arrival, her confidence wavering for the first time. The first officer spoke quietly into his radio again. Then he looked at her. This document claims shared ownership interest, he said. Because it's true, she replied quickly. He looked back down at the paper, then back up at her. This notary stamp is from another county, he said calmly. Her expression flickered, and the parcel number listed does not match this property. Silence fell. Not dramatic silence. Heavy silence. The kind that carries implication. Her friends stared at her, confusion replacing loyalty. What does that mean? One of them asked quietly. Paige's face flushed. It's just a mistake, she said sharply. But mistakes didn't explain everything. Mistakes didn't explain why she had brought 12 people. Mistakes didn't explain why she had brought cameras. Mistakes didn't explain why she had arrived so confidently. The officer handed the document to one of the newly arrived police officers. The police officer read it carefully, then looked at Paige. Where did you get this? She crossed her arms. It was given to me? By who? She hesitated. Again, That hesitation said more than any answer. Inside the house, I exhaled slowly, because now, this wasn't just family conflict. This was evidence. The police officer turned toward the house. "Mom," he called. "Are you the homeowner?" This was the moment. The moment Paige had always counted on. The moment where I would hesitate. Where I would soften. Where I would surrender control to avoid conflict. Instead, I opened the door. Not wide. Just enough. I stayed inside the threshold. "This is my property," I said calmly. The officer nodded. "Did you invite this group to enter or stay?" "No." One word. Clean. Permanent. Behind him, Paige let out an incredulous laugh. "You told me to come?" she snapped. "I told you to arrive," I said calmly. Her expression faltered, subtle, but real. The officer looked between us. Then back at Paige. "You are being instructed to leave," he said firmly. Her breathing quickened. Her phone lowered slightly. Reality was catching up. "You can't do this," she said, her voice cracking at the edges. The officer didn't argue. He simply waited. Waiting was powerful. Waiting forced truth to surface. Behind her, her friends began gathering their things. Quietly, one by one. Because suddenly, staying wasn't worth it anymore. Paige noticed. Panic flashed across her face. Not panic about losing the house. Panic about losing the audience. Because without an audience, she had no leverage. She turned back toward me. Her voice dropped. Low. Threatening. "This isn't over," she said. For the first time that day, she wasn't performing. She was promising. I met her gaze calmly. Because I understood something she didn't yet realize. This had never been about one afternoon. This had been about control. And control had just shifted. She turned abruptly and walked toward her car. Her friends followed, quiet, avoiding eye contact. Doors slammed. Engines started. One by one, the vehicles pulled away, until only silence remained. The officer turned back to me. "If she returns," he said, "call immediately." I nodded. He handed me a card, a case number, proof, structure, protection, not emotional protection, legal protection. As the officers left, I closed the door. The house was quiet again, peaceful again, mine again. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe fully. But peace doesn't erase intention, it only delays its next move. My phone buzzed. A text from Paige. Just one sentence. "You think you stopped me? You didn't?" I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. "Mom and Dad already handled it." My stomach tightened. Handled what? I opened the county property website, typed in my parcel number, and what I saw didn't make sense. Not at first, but when it did, my blood ran cold, because according to public record, ownership had changed. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to create doubt, enough to create confusion, enough to create leverage. Someone had filed something recent, something deliberate, something planned. And suddenly, Paige showing up with cameras wasn't the beginning. It was the middle, because while she was standing on my porch pretending to visit, someone else had been inside the system, filing paperwork, changing records, preparing to take my house, without ever stepping inside it. And the next morning, when I walked into the county records office, the clerk looked at me and asked one question that changed everything. "Did you authorize the transfer?" The county records office didn't look like the kind of place where lives fell apart. It looked ordinary, neutral, rows of gray chairs, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a counter separating clerks from the public like a quiet barrier between truth and assumption. People stood in line holding folders, envelopes, and forms. Most of them looked bored. Some looked impatient. None of them looked like they were about to discover their home had been quietly stolen. I stood at the counter when it was my turn. "My name is Nora Hart," I said calmly. "I need to verify something about my property record." The clerk nodded and asked for the parcel number. I handed it over. She typed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Her face remained neutral at first. Then she stopped. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she leaned closer to the screen. That was the first moment I knew something was wrong. Not emotionally wrong, procedurally wrong. She looked up at me carefully. Did you authorize a document to be recorded yesterday afternoon? Her voice wasn't accusing. It was cautious, controlled. No, I said immediately. One word, certain. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. I need to bring my supervisor. She didn't explain further. She didn't reassure me. She simply stood and walked through a door behind the counter. I waited. The waiting was worse than the question, because questions left room for explanation. Waiting left room for confirmation. The supervisor returned with her moments later. She was older, composed, and efficient. She introduced herself without smiling. May I see your identification? She asked. I handed it over. She compared it to the information on her screen, then nodded once. You are listed as the current owner, she said. Current owner, present tense, temporary, conditional. But, she continued carefully, quitclaim deed was recorded yesterday. The words landed with surgical precision. A quitclaim deed. I knew what that was. It wasn't a sale. It wasn't a transfer with negotiation. It was a claim. A claim that someone had voluntarily given up their ownership interest. My ownership interest? I didn't sign anything, I said. My voice remained steady. The supervisor didn't argue. She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. The scanned document filled the screen. My address. My name. Typed neatly into legal language. And beneath it, a signature. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. It looked like mine at a glance. Close enough to fool someone who didn't know me. But wrong in the details. Too careful. Too deliberate. Too artificial. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed calm. That is not my signature. The supervisor nodded once. Me understand, she said. She printed the document and handed it to me. I took it carefully, like it might burn. The notary stamp sat beneath the signature. Official. Authorized. Fraudulent. Who filed this? I asked. She pointed to a section near the bottom. Submitter name Elaine Hart. My mother. The air around me didn't change, but something inside me did. Not shock, not surprise, recognition. This hadn't been Paige acting alone. This had been coordinated, planned, executed. Paige brought the distraction. My mother filed the paperwork. 2 separate moves. 1 single objective, control. They used electronic recording, the supervisor explained. That means it was submitted digitally through an authorized account. Authorized account. That meant access. That meant preparation. That meant intent. What happens now? I asked. She folded her hands calmly. You need to file a fraud statement immediately, she said. That flags the record and begins review. She slid a form toward me. Property record fraud affidavit. The words felt heavy, final, necessary. I filled it out carefully. Every detail factual, every statement precise. I did not sign this document. I did not authorize this transfer. I am the sole legal owner. No emotion. Just truth. She took the form and processed it. This will place a hold on further electronic filings, she said. But the recorded document remains part of the public record until legally removed. Until legally removed. That meant court. That meant lawyers. That meant escalation. This wasn't family conflict anymore. This was legal warfare. I stepped outside into the sunlight, the forged document still in my hands. My phone buzzed. A text from Paige. They told you, didn't they? Another message followed. You should have just let us stay. I stared at the screen. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was strategy. She had expected this moment. Expected my reaction. Expected my fear. But fear wasn't what I felt. I felt clarity. Because she had made one mistake. She had created evidence. I called my title insurance company immediately. When the representative answered, I spoke calmly. A fraudulent quitclaim deed was recorded against my property yesterday. He paused. Then his voice shifted into procedure. We'll open a claim immediately, he said. Procedure, documentation, investigation, systems. Not emotions. Systems were harder to manipulate, harder to intimidate, harder to control. As I ended the call, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail? From my mother. I didn't listen to it. Not yet. Listening was emotional. Saving was strategic. I saved it. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. I drove straight to my attorney's office. Rachel didn't waste time on sympathy. She read the document carefully. Then she looked up at me. They forged your signature? She said plainly. Not a question, a fact? Less. She nodded. We file for quiet title, she said. Quiet title. The legal process that erased fraudulent claims, restored ownership, reaffirmed truth. How long? I asked. Depends, she said. But we move immediately. She began typing, drafting, preparing. Her efficiency was reassuring, not emotionally reassuring, structurally reassuring. Because structure meant protection. Then she stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing at the screen. What? I asked. She turned the monitor toward me. Submission email. The account used to file the forged deed. The domain name was unmistakable. Heart Media House. Page's business. Her company, her brand, her identity. She hadn't just participated. She had submitted it. Personally, directly, deliberately. This wasn't influence. This was execution. Rachel leaned back slightly. This ties her directly to the fraud, she said. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Paige. You can't stop what's already recorded. I stared at the message, then saved it. Evidence. Everything was evidence. Rachel continued typing. So we file emergency injunction, she said. We prevent further filings. Prevention, protection, control restored. But control came with consequences. And consequences were coming. Because Paige thought she had already won. She thought paperwork was permanent. She thought records were final. She thought systems protected whoever used them first. But systems also exposed whoever abused them. And she had left fingerprints everywhere. Digital fingerprints. Legal fingerprints. Permanent fingerprints. She didn't know it yet. But she had just turned family manipulation into prosecutable fraud. Because later that afternoon, when the submission metadata finally came in, it didn't just show Paige's business email. It showed the exact time the forged deed was uploaded. And it was the same exact minute. She had been standing on my porch, smiling for the camera. Below is part 4 of your rewritten story, fully original, expanded, and continuing the escalation. It includes the restraining order, service of legal papers, and the emotional and legal turning point ending with a powerful coup for 5. Part 4. The moment paper turned against her, the metadata arrived faster than I expected. Not because systems were fast, because fraud accelerated everything. Rachel's phone buzzed on her desk. She glanced down at the screen, then immediately opened the email. Her expression didn't shift dramatically. It sharpened, focus replacing neutrality. They responded, she said. She clicked the attachment. Lines of technical information filled the screen. Numbers, timestamps, submission records, details most people would never care about. Details that could dismantle everything Paige had tried to build. Rachel scrolled slowly, her eyes tracking each line with professional precision. Then she stopped. There, she said quietly. She turned the monitor toward me. Submission timestamp 2014 p.m. IP address origin Heart Media House Office Network. Submission email, admin Heart Media House. I stared at the timestamp 2014 p.m. My mind immediately replayed the afternoon before. Paige arriving at my house. Paige stepping onto my porch. Paige smiling into her phone camera. Paige knocking like she belonged there. She hadn't come hoping to gain access. She had come believing she already had it. Because at 2014 p.m., while she was standing outside pretending to visit, She had already submitted the forged deed, already attempted to take ownership, already set the legal trap. The visit wasn't the plan, the visit was the performance. Rachel leaned back slightly. This proves intent, she said. Intent. That word mattered. Intent separated misunderstanding from crime. Intent separated accident from fraud. Intent made consequences inevitable. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Paige. Rachel raised her hand immediately. Don't listen to it, she said. Not yet. I nodded. She was right. Listening was emotional. Saving was strategic. Evidence didn't need interpretation. It needed preservation. Rachel began typing quickly. We're filing an emergency restraining order, she said. What does that do? I asked. It prevents her from filing anything else, Rachel replied. It legally prohibits her and your parents from attempting further claims against your property. Prohibits. Not requests, not suggestions, orders, legal orders. She printed the documents and handed them to me. Sign here. I signed, not out of fear, out of ownership, because ownership wasn't just possession. Ownership was defense. Within an hour, we were standing inside the courthouse. The building didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel cinematic. It felt administrative, routine, which made it more powerful. Because routine meant systems worked. Even when families didn't. Rachel submitted the emergency filing. The clerk stamped it without hesitation. Ink against paper. Authority made visible. Judge will review shortly. The clerk said, shortly. That word carried weight. Because Paige had spent her entire life believing consequences were slow, optional, avoidable, she was wrong. We waited in a small hearing room, quiet, neutral, controlled. The judge entered without ceremony. He reviewed the documents silently. The forged deed, the metadata, the fraud affidavit, the police report, Paige's text messages. Each piece alone was concerning. Together, they were undeniable. He looked up. Is there evidence of ongoing threat? He asked. Rachel handed him printed copies of Paige's messages, her threats, her confidence, her assumptions. He read them carefully. Then he signed the order. Simple, final, authority without emotion. The temporary restraining order is granted, he said. Granted, one word, but it changed everything. Rachel didn't celebrate. She moved immediately to the next step. Now we serve them, she said. Service, formal notification, legal awareness. Because consequences didn't exist until they were delivered. A process server met us in the courthouse lobby. He accepted the documents calmly. Routine, professional, efficient. Addresses, he asked. Rachel provided them. My parents' home, Paige's business office. He nodded. I'll handle it today. Today, not someday, not eventually, today. We left the courthouse quietly, not victorious, prepared, because this wasn't over. It was just formal now. That evening, I returned to the beach house. The ocean hadn't changed. The air hadn't changed. The house hadn't changed. But I had. Because ownership wasn't just a document anymore. It was defended, protected, enforced. My phone buzzed late that night. A message from an unknown number. Then another. Then another. Paige, using different numbers. Different attempts. Same intention. I didn't respond. Response was emotional. Silence was strategic. The next morning, Rachel called. They've been served, she said. How did she react? I asked. Rachel paused briefly. She said it was fake. Of course she did. Denial was her first defense. Did she accept the papers? I asked. No, Rachel replied. She refused to sign acknowledgement. Refusal didn't matter. Service wasn't optional. Service was procedural. They're officially notified now. Rachel said. Officially notified. Officially restrained. Officially exposed. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail from my mother. I listened. Her voice was calm, controlled, calculated. You've made a mistake, she said. Not you've been hurt. Not let's talk. You've made a mistake. You don't understand how things work. She continued. I saved the voicemail. Evidence. Everything was evidence. Because they weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to reassert control. Through pressure. Through intimidation. Through assumption. But assumption wasn't evidence. And evidence was stronger. Rachel called again later that day. "We've filed the quiet title action," she said. "Filed, official, permanent. This begins the legal process to remove the forged deed entirely. Entirely, not partially, not conditionally, entirely." My phone buzzed again. Page, one message, short, direct. "You really think this will stop me?" I stared at the screen. Not angry, not afraid. Certain, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't controlling the timeline. The court was, and courts didn't care about performance. They cared about proof, and she had given them plenty. Because 3 days later, when her lawyer finally contacted mine, he didn't threaten. He didn't negotiate. He asked one question, one careful, deliberate question that told us everything had changed. "Is your client willing to settle before criminal charges are filed?" Rachel didn't answer the settlement question immediately. She let the silence exist. Not as hesitation, as strategy. The call was on speaker in her office. The opposing attorney's voice had none of Paige's usual arrogance. None of the entitlement. None of the performance. It was careful, measured, concerned. "Is your client willing to settle before criminal charges are filed?" he repeated. Rachel leaned back slightly in her chair. "Settle what?" she asked calmly. There was a pause on the other end. That pause said everything. Because settlement only existed when there was something to settle. Something wrong, something indefensible. "My client," he said slowly, "believes this is a family misunderstanding." Rachel didn't smile. She didn't argue. She simply replied, "Forgery is not a misunderstanding." Silence again, longer this time, because he knew it. He had seen the metadata, the forged deed, the timestamps, the submission records. Evidence didn't negotiate. Evidence exposed. He cleared his throat. "What would your client require to resolve this civilly?" Rachel looked at me. Not for permission, for confirmation. I already knew my answer. "I want the forged deed removed," I said calmly. Rachel nodded, and, she asked quietly, I didn't hesitate. "I want them permanently barred from filing anything against my property again." Rachel repeated my conditions to him, clean, direct, final. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He didn't defend Paige. Because there was nothing left to defend. "We'll discuss it," he said. Then the call ended. Rachel turned to me. "They're afraid," she said. "Not emotionally afraid. Legally afraid. Because civil fraud could become criminal fraud. And criminal fraud carried consequences Paige couldn't film her way out of." Days passed quietly. Not peacefully. Strategically. Every system had been activated. The recorder's fraud hold. The restraining order. The quiet title action. The investigation. Paige stopped texting. Stopped calling. Stopped performing. Silence had replaced her confidence. Silence was unfamiliar territory for her. Because silence meant she wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. The narrative was controlling her. A week later, Rachel received confirmation. "They've agreed to sign corrective documents," she said. Corrective documents. Official admission. Not verbal. Not emotional. Legal. "They're relinquishing all claims," Rachel continued. Relinquishing. Giving up. Surrendering. Not because they wanted to. Because they had to. The forged quitclaim deed would be legally voided, erased, removed from authority. Not erased from history, but erased from power. 2 weeks later, the hearing finalized everything. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No audience, no cameras, no performance. Just process. The judge reviewed the filings carefully. The forged deed, the metadata, the corrective documents. Paige sat at the opposite table, quiet, still, smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. For once, she wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't filming. She was exposed. The judge signed the final order. The forged quitclaim deed is hereby declared null and void, he said. Null and void, 2 words. Absolute, permanent, ownership restored fully. Legally, undeniably. Paige didn't look at me. She stared at the table. Because eye contact required confidence. Confidence required control. Control was gone. When the hearing ended, she stood quickly and walked out. No final words. No dramatic confrontation, because she understood something now she hadn't understood before. Paper wasn't just a weapon. It was accountability, and accountability had found her. Outside the courthouse, Rachel handed me the certified copy of the order. This is the clean record, she said. Clean, restored, protected mine. Not emotionally mine, legally mine, completely mine. I drove back to the beach house that afternoon. The ocean looked the same, unchanged, indifferent. The house stood exactly as I had left it, calm, still, secure. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The sunlight filled the living room again, peacefully, naturally. No cameras, no demands, no entitlement, just space, just quiet, just ownership. My phone buzzed once. A single message. From Paige. Not from a new number, not hidden. Her real number. The message was short. You didn't have to do all that. I stared at it. Not angry, not hurt, certain. Because she still didn't understand. She thought this had been escalation, conflict, drama. But it hadn't been. It had been defense, protection, boundary. I didn't reply, because closure didn't require explanation. Closure required distance. Weeks passed. The fraud hold remained in place. The court order remained active. The record remained clean. Paige never came back. Neither did my parents. Not because they suddenly respected me, because they respected consequences. And consequences had become permanent. One evening, I stood near the window watching the ocean as the sun disappeared into the horizon. The house was quiet, not lonely, safe. Because safety wasn't about isolation. It was about control. Control over who entered. Control over who stayed. Control over what belonged to me. The house had never just been a building. It had been proof. Proof that I could exist without their permission. Proof that ownership didn't require their approval. Proof that boundaries didn't require their agreement. They only required enforcement. And enforcement had changed everything. Because in the end, Paige didn't lose the house because she wasn't family. She lost it because family didn't override law. And law didn't care about entitlement. It cared about truth. And truth was finally on record. But the strangest part wasn't the court order. It wasn't the fraud. It wasn't even the silence afterward. It was this. The house didn't feel different because they lost. It felt different because I stopped waiting for them to win.